as a result of drone strikes. In the Kursk region, between 25 and 26 July, one person was reportedly killed and 6 others were reportedly injured as a result of drone attacks and the mine explosion. In the Leningrad region, on 28 July, debris from a crashed drone reportedly caused a fire, killing 1 civilian and injuring 3. In the Rostov region, on the night of 29 July, a reported drone strike killed a driver and triggered a fire at a railway station. While the United Nations is not in a position to verify these reports, we remain concerned about the increasing impact of the reported Ukrainian strikes on the civilian population in the Russian Federation. We also reiterate that attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international law and must stop immediately, wherever they occur. Mr. President, last week we commended the parties for the continuing prisoners of war exchanges that reunited thousands of people with their families. The situation of the remaining captives, however, remains of serious concern. Since early June, OHCHR has interviewed nearly 140 male Ukrainian prisoners of war who were recently released, many after up to 3 years of captivity. Nearly all of the former prisoners interviewed by OHCHR reported having been subjected to torture or ill treatment, including severe beatings, electric shocks, sexual violence, dog attacks, suffocation, mutilation, or conditions so inhuman that they resulted in the deaths of fellow prisoners. These findings confirm the previously documented patterns of widespread and systemic torture. Civilians detained by the Russian Federation and interviewed by OHCHR also continue to recount widespread and routine torture and ill treatment, as well as arbitrary detention and enforced disappearance. Disturbingly, OHCHR has also recorded credible allegations of the execution of 106 Ukrainian soldiers captured by the Russian armed forces between late August 2024 and May 2025. We continue to urge the sides to fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law in their treatment of prisoners of war. We also encourage them to continue the exchanges to bring all prisoners home. Mr. President, the Ukrainian people have endured nearly 3.5 years of unimaginable horrors, death, devastation, and destruction. They urgently need relief from this nightmare. We therefore reiterate our urgent call for an immediate, unconditional and complete ceasefire to pave the way towards a just, lasting and comprehensive peace. A peace that is in line with the Charter of the United Nations, international law and relevant UN resolutions in full respect of the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Diplomacy, not fighting, needs to escalate in the coming days and weeks. Diplomacy that leads to real, tangible, verifiable, and lasting results that would be felt by the long-suffering people on the ground. The United Nations remains ready to support all meaningful efforts to this end. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Yencha for the briefing that he's provided. I will now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Yes, Mr. President, and let me once again congratulate you and personally and Panama on assuming the presidency for the month of August, you can count on Denmark's full support. I wish to start by thanking Assistant Secretary General Jenča for his briefing, and I also welcome the participation in this meeting of Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, and the European Union. Mr. President, some may question why this Council is meeting to address the situation in Ukraine today, once again, just over 24 hours since we last convened on this issue. The sad truth is that just hours before we sat here yesterday, reiterating our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Russia was busy attacking Ukraine in one of the most vicious and violent attacks so far in this long, tragic war. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, was particularly targeted. Destructions were massive, with more than 30 civilians killed and 159 wounded, many of them children, as we just heard from ASG Jenča. Even though these harrowing attacks have sadly become reality in everyday life in Ukraine, here in this chamber, we must do all we can to break this cycle. We cannot become numb to these images, to the suffering they convey, nor can we allow Russia's behavior to be condoned. So, following the latest massive attacks on Kyiv and other regions, Ukraine rightly asked the Security Council to convene an emergency meeting. Denmark, together with France, Greece, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom, supported this call. We did so because we believe that as the primary body for maintenance of international peace and security, it is our collective responsibility to respond. Mr. President, as we've heard, in just one night, Russia launched over 300 drones and missiles at Ukrainian cities, with devastating impact on civilians and civilian infrastructure. We cannot accept this. No country who signed the UN Charter should accept this. We recall that civilians and civilian objects are protected under international humanitarian law and must not be targeted. Denmark strongly condemns these attacks. It is clear that the string of attacks is escalating in intensity and that Russia relentlessly continues its illegal invasion. These are not the actions of a country interested in peace. Mr. President, we strongly call on Russia to agree on an immediate and unconditional ceasefire without any delay, a ceasefire that Ukraine has long been ready to agree to. Denmark reiterates our call for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, in line with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. We support all efforts aimed at achieving this goal, including initiatives led by the United States. We urge Russia to engage in the peace talks constructively and in good faith. The Ukrainian people have endured too much for too long. Peace is long overdue, and we truly believe it is within reach if Russia finally realizes that its illegal war of aggression needs to end. Until then, Denmark will continue our unwavering support for Ukraine in its legitimate self-defense. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. Thank you, Mr. President, and please receive my best wishes for your presidency of the Council this month of August. I too would like to present my congratulations to the permanent representative of Pakistan for his effective presidency and that of his mission throughout the month of July. I'd like to thank the Assistant Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Mr. Jenča, for his briefing. The weight of every word of it was fully understood. I'd like to also welcome our colleagues from Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, and the European Union. Mr. President, once again, we're meeting to discuss Ukraine. Why? Because the situation is intolerable there in Ukraine and for Ukraine. It's intolerable because Russia has deliberately chosen to continue its war of aggression, and with it, its trail of indiscriminate strikes, war crimes, and flagrant violations of international humanitarian law. On the 14th of July, after unheeded offers made to Russia, the President of the United States issued a clear ultimatum to Russia, urging it to engage in good faith in negotiations and to bring an end to its war. Since then, Russia has in total struck Ukrainian territory on more than 3,400 occasions, resulting in more than 80 civilian deaths and wounding more than 300. On the night of the 31st of July to the 1st of August alone, Russian strikes on Kyiv killed at least 31 civilians, including 5 children, and injuring more than 150. These massive strike campaigns bear out a deliberate strategy of military escalation and aim to instill terror among Ukrainian civilians. Behind the repeated falsehoods that we hear from Russia in meeting after meeting, the facts are damning. At the origin of this war, there is one thing: Russia's decision to invade a sovereign country that posed no threat to it in flagrant violation of the Charter and international law. Many of us reiterated this just yesterday. Russia's war of aggression is a war of choice, through choice made by Russia. Invading Ukraine and attempting to annex certain parts of its territory is pursuing an outdated form of imperialism. Seeking to disguise this by claiming to fight neo-Nazism or to act preemptively against alleged NATO aggression is both a lie and an instrumentalization of the Security Council. Russia can every day choose to halt its aggression without compromising its own security, far to the contrary. Mr. President, as the people of Kyiv observe a day of mourning this Friday, Russia is stubbornly choosing to ignore calls for peace and to reject the ceasefire that Ukraine accepted 5 months ago and the entire international community is demanding. Russia is continuing with its delaying tactics. Let's, for instance, take the Istanbul meetings, where Ukraine was prepared to attend at summit level to discuss a ceasefire and a path to peace. Russia downgraded these to expert-level discussions and reiterated demands tantamount to the mutilation and the subjugation of Ukraine. In truth, Russia seeks nothing less than Ukraine's outright capitulation. Through its Kremlin spokesperson, it bluntly states that it cannot at this stage achieve its objectives through diplomacy, and it must therefore continue its so-called special military operation, a euphemism for invasion and attempted annexation. Until when? Mr. President, the Council can no longer merely observe that the aggressor refuses to bring an end to its aggression, above all when this aggressor in the Charter has a special responsibility, that is to permanently protect states from aggression and to permanently protect international peace and security. The Council must compel the aggressor to comply with this by demanding a full, immediate and unconditional ceasefire. That's our role and our duty. The Charter entrusts this to us and the world expects us to fulfill it. Thank you very much.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Panama for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of August, and to thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency meeting. Congratulations also to Pakistan for a successful stewardship of the Council during the month of July. I would also like to thank Assistant Secretary General Yencha for his briefing, and I welcome the participation of Ukraine, along with Lithuania, Poland, and the European Union in this meeting. Mr. President, the war in Ukraine has reached an inflection point. Russia escalates its attacks, reinforced with weapons and munitions by its allies and with troops by DPRK in violation of Security Council resolutions. Day after day, Russia continues its attacks also against residential areas, causing more human suffering and destroying civilian infrastructure. During these last 3 days, missile strikes have claimed dozens of civilian lives in Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and just yesterday in Kiev, using loitering munitions and cruise missiles. Pregnant women and children are among the casualties. We deplore the reported use of new lethal weapons, such as rocket-powered kamikaze drones against civilians in residential areas. June has seen the highest monthly civilian toll in Ukraine, and this alarming trend has continued in July due to attacks not only close but also far from the front line. Once more, Greece condemns in the strongest terms any attacks against civilians and civilian objects as clear violations of the basic principles of international humanitarian law, and calls on Russia to immediately cease the targeting of residential areas and infrastructure in Ukraine. Adherence to these principles constitutes not only a legal requirement, but also a moral imperative and should go hand in hand with accountability for the perpetrators. We stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people in these trying times. We also commend the work of Odesa, UNICEF, and other humanitarian agencies active in Ukraine, and we are calling for their full, safe, and unhindered access to the affected areas. Mr. President, Russia's war against Ukraine has to stop, as repeatedly stressed by the majority of the UN membership in multiple General Assembly resolutions. These blatant violations of international law should not be allowed to become the new norm. Greece welcomed the 3 rounds of direct bilateral talks between the two parties and the agreements on exchange of prisoners, but regrets that these agreements were the only tangible results in the course of 5 months. The human toll, as well as the rest of the devastating consequences of this war, at least of recent months, would have been avoided had a ceasefire been agreed following the US-led peace efforts. Mr. President, this war must end. Too much time has been lost. We repeat the need for a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire without further delay as the first step towards a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in line with international law and the UN Charter, and in full respect of its most fundamental principles, sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of all states. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and as others, I want to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council for the August, and you have all our support. And I also want to thank our colleague, the Pakistan Permanent Representative, and his team for so successfully steering the Council through July. Mr. President, I would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Janša for his briefing today and for his contribution to the discussion. Let me make a few points. First, let's remind ourselves of some facts. What we are witnessing in Ukraine is a nuclear power attacking and occupying a smaller neighbor. The aggression continues for the 4th year. Reasons for invasion keep changing and are ranging from situation of Russian minority, Ukrainian NATO aspirations, unspecified security concerns, to supposedly nationalistic orientation of government and people. As per UN Charter, none of these reasons can be a justification for aggression. The conflict is rapidly deteriorating. With each passing meeting, we speak of a new negative record. Deadliest night, deadliest year, largest number of missiles and drones launched in a single day. These are facts, and it is good to keep reminding ourselves of them, as with months and years, fatigue settles in and pictures become blurry. Second, the Council is often paralyzed to take meaningful action. However, civilians in armed conflicts continue to turn their eyes and hopes and expectations to the Council when horrible things are happening to them. This applies to Ukrainians, to Gazans, to Sudanese, to Haitians, or civilians suffering in any other conflict area. For Ukrainians, when a tragedy like the one 2 nights ago happens, the least they expect is for the Council to discuss, hopefully condemn, and ultimately to protect them. Third, even if we have different views on path to peace in Ukraine, we need to exchange views and arguments. in order to hopefully one day start hearing each other and finding a needle of solution in a haystack of arguments, to find a way forward to stop suffering of civilians. Mr. President, Slovenia remains deeply concerned with Russia's escalation of aggression against Ukraine, with civilian casualties on the rise for months, and with more firepower being used in the overnight aerial attacks. 2025 is rapidly becoming the deadliest year of this war. Instead of engaging on a path to peace, Russian Federation is increasing its pressure on Ukrainian civilians. The latest aerial strikes on Kiev are an example of this escalation. Overnight attacks with explosive weaponry in densely populated urban areas have no justification. They cannot be excused by claims of pursuing military goals, not in Gaza and neither in Kiev. On the contrary, civilians who lost their lives or were injured should have been protected. Slovenia reiterates its condemnation of these attacks, including the most recent ones. Mr. President, in the past months, we heard Russian officials commit to peace numerous times. Nevertheless, Russia decided to escalate. Its attacks, including the most recent ones, cast serious doubt on Russia's willingness to walk the path towards peace in Ukraine. Mr. President, at the beginning of this year, the Council has called for a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. 14 of us keep calling for a ceasefire. Still, after months, tangible results are lacking. We need a decisive next step to stop the bloodshed, to stop the destruction. We need a ceasefire, and we need it now. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council. I'd also like to thank ASG Jenča for briefing us today. Colleagues, as we meet here, only a day after our last discussion on Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine, I do so acutely aware that this is a day of mourning in Kyiv. And I extend my sympathy and condolences to all who mourn in Ukraine today. Russia continues to inflict devastation across Ukraine. The Russian strikes we witness demonstrate the stark reality. While Ukraine continues to set out its willingness to move towards peace, Putin's response is to kill more innocent civilians. Over the last 4 nights, Russia has fired 487 drones and 10 missiles at Ukrainian cities, killing 64 civilians and injuring over 279 more. On Wednesday night alone, 31 people were killed in Kyiv, the deadliest attack in the city this year. Local authorities have reported that 12 children were among the injured, making it the highest number of children injured in an attack on the capital since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Every meeting we have on Ukraine, we hear more heartbreaking stories about civilian deaths, including the tragic killing of a 6-year-old boy on Wednesday night and the hospitalization of at least 9 other children. Russia is unmoved by this. We are not. These are not just numbers. Each represents an individual life lost, a future snuffed out, and for the wounded, a future irrevocably blighted by Russia, as I saw for myself when I visited rehabilitation centres in Kyiv. The human toll of President Putin's continued illegal, unjustifiable war against Ukraine is immense. Russia's attacks on civilians, on children, and on civilian infrastructure tell us everything we need to know about President Putin's intentions. Every Russian strike is a commitment not to peace, but an attempt to destroy life and liberty in Ukraine. And this is despite Russia's obligations in international law, in the UN Charter, and Russia's status as a permanent member of this council. Their strikes, however, continue to escalate. So we echo President Trump's call for President Putin to engage meaningfully at the negotiating table. This council was all but unanimous yesterday in calling for an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire. That remains our call today. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by congratulating the Pakistani delegation, congratulate you on the successfully completing your presidency, and wish every success to the colleagues of Panama. It is highly regrettable that the work of the Security Council, including on the first day of your presidency, is becoming, through the efforts made by Ukraine and its Western backers, into a Groundhog Day of sorts. It's as if yesterday the representative of Kiev was not sitting in the same chair and didn't try to put forward the talking points of Ukrainian propaganda about the bloodthirsty Russia in its plans to subjugate the neighboring country, and as if the European sponsors of the regime was not reading through their talking points about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Their senseless mantras about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Colleagues, why couldn't we discuss the topic of the meeting yesterday? Especially since the tragedy in Kiev, which is being mentioned in the letter sent by the Ukrainian PR, happened in the early hours of the 31st of July. The Ukrainian representative yesterday essentially voiced her version of what happened, as predictable as it was. Does the Council accept such an inept waste of its time and resources on other issues on its agenda? Imagine that we had had a situation on the country situation and then decided that we had forgotten to discuss one aspect and then reconvened on the next day to discuss that. We think that such an approach of the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime is irresponsible, unacceptable, and seriously undermining the credibility of the Council and its ability to tackle with indeed urgent crises. And they have the temerity of accusing my country of wasting the working time of Security Council members. Furthermore, when they condone the attempts of the Kiev regime to separate the discussions of the Ukrainian crisis into right discussions and wrong discussions, the Western delegations do show the very same wish to undermine the efforts for peace in Ukraine, which we describe in our statements, including my statements yesterday. Mr. President, if we go back to the formal reason for the convening of the meeting today, well, in the early hours of the 31st of July, the armed forces of Russia, pursuing the goal of demilitarizing Ukraine, did indeed deliver a group strike using a long-range, high-precision weapons and UAVs on military-industrial facilities of Ukraine, including a military airfield, ammunition depots, stocks of missiles, and UAV components. All of the intended military targets were hit. And let me underscore once again, we're talking about objects which are related to the Ukraine military potential. And this was confirmed by the videos by Ukrainian users in social networks, which show very clearly the secondary explosion of ammunitions at the objects we hit, some of which were deployed in civilian sector in violation of the IHL. On the other hand, our armed forces, as was the case before, were acting in strict compliance with international humanitarian law and were not targeting civilian objects. When it comes to striking the residential building in Kiev and the deaths of civilians, well, the military experts who analyze the videos which exist concurred on the only reason for the tragedy, as was the case previously as well. The reason is the criminal deployment of the Ukrainian air defense in dense urban areas and the unskilled way of guiding them. During this special military operation, we have received numerous confirmation of the fact that Ukrainian air defense missiles are the main danger for the civilians of this country, and the Ukrainians know that very much, and they openly comment on this. If the armed forces of Ukraine did comply with the IHL, then we would have been able to avoid such tragedies. And the civilian population of Ukraine is not suffering from direct Russian strikes. But the expired princeling in Kiev is not interested in easing the plight and suffering of his civilians, but rather in presenting such situations provoked by him into present them as intentional Russian strikes. His only goal here is to save his own hide and convince his sponsors to continue financial and military support to his agonizing dictatorial and corrupt regime. The abuse of the Security Council meetings so as to shift the responsibility for the death of his own citizens is a favorite trick of Ukrainian state propaganda. It is not a coincidence, and many have noted that the most high-impact tragedies miraculously coincide with the eve or the time of the visit of the Kiev clique abroad, when he needs to get the pity from yet another country or cage another tranche of military or financial assistance. What's left outside here is the fact that the Ukrainians themselves launch several hundreds of UAVs against our country daily, intentionally trying to strike civilian objects in their futile attempts to sow panic and undermine the stability of my country. Last week alone, as a result of that, 155 civilians were injured, two-thirds of them because of drone strikes. The highest number of victims were in Belgorod, Kherson, Zaporozhye Oblast, and the Krasnodar region. The Ukrainians are deliberately targeting the places where civilians are congregate, residential buildings, public transport, and emergency services. For example, as a result of a UAV strike against an ambulance in the Pologo region in Zaporozhye Oblast, the driver of the ambulance died, and the paramedic and the nurse there were injured. In Golopristan district of Kherson Oblast, 3 civilians died and 5 were injured because of a drone attack on a civilian bus. All of these facts are carefully ignored by Kiev and his backers, as we have been able to see very well today. And what is being done by secretariat staff from relevant agencies is also disingenuous, because they pretend they don't know nothing about this, or they say that it's impossible to verify the information about Ukrainian crimes. All of this is obviously a strike undermining credibility of the UN. Mr. President, in conclusion, let me underscore yet once again that we are not against discussing the Ukrainian crisis in the Council. We're against making the tragedy of the Ukrainians who became hostages of the Zelensky regime and his maniacal will to sacrifice them on the altar of geopolitical interests, that it be exploited in the Council for political reasons. It's disrespectful and indifferent to the suffering of thousands of people who are dying and suffering in other areas of the world, and Western members of Security Council are in no hurry to ask for meetings on that. I'd like to believe that reasonable Security Council and international community members with good sense will support us in this. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by congratulating you and Panama on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of August. We are confident that under your able and astute stewardship, our deliberations will be most productive this month. And to this end, I would like to assure you of my delegation's full support. I would also like to thank ASG Jansha for his detailed briefing. President, Pakistan has repeatedly expressed its deep concerns on the continuing hostilities and the devastating consequences of this protracted conflict, which is now into its fourth year, and particularly the humanitarian toll. The recent escalation in fighting resulting in loss of innocent lives is both tragic and deplorable. Pakistan notes with consternation that the diplomatic efforts at the start of this year, including Security Council's Resolution 2774, which Pakistan supported, multiple rounds of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the limited ceasefire understandings between the parties, are yet to translate into meaningful progress that could lead to cessation of hostilities and bring peace in the region. On the contrary, the recent surge in violence and hostilities seem to have dented the earlier peace efforts and the glimmer of hope that these nascent diplomatic initiatives had produced. While prisoner exchanges and talks in Istanbul are a welcome development, the ongoing violence, death, and destruction continue to cast a shadow over the peace efforts. So President Pakistan reiterates the following urgent imperatives. First, the protection of civilians is a must. International humanitarian law is clear. It must be upheld unconditionally. Targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure cannot be justified. Second, the pursuit of military means to resolve this conflict would only lead to a dead end and will only deepen the suffering of people affected by this conflict. Sustainable peace demands de-escalation, ceasefire, and unwavering commitment to dialogue. Third, the commitment to peace specifically expressed in Resolution 2744 and reinforced in general by Resolution 2788 is the only viable path forward. The ongoing peace talks must translate into tangible progress, and steps such as prisoner swaps should build mutual trust and confidence and catalyze broader political negotiations aimed at ending this conflict. Mr. President, Pakistan has been a consistent advocate for peace. From the very outset, we have called for de-escalation and according primacy to dialogue and diplomacy. Only a sincere and meaningful dialogue which addresses the security concerns of all sides is anchored in the principles of UN Charter and international law and respects the relevant multilateral agreements can help secure peace, which is both just and enduring. Pakistan will support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to begin by taking this opportunity of this first meeting to congratulate Panama for taking up the presidency of the Security Council this month of August. Mr. President, you can count on Algeria's full support. Likewise, we congratulate Pakistan for its successful presidency throughout July. I'd like to thank Mr. Miroslav Jenča for his valuable briefing. Mr. President, despite positive diplomatic efforts and the 3 meetings between the sides, regrettably, the war between Russia and Ukraine continues to claim innocent lives and to leave many victims and wounded in its wake. In this context, my country continues to reiterate its profound concern at the increasing international polarization, which is intensifying and prolonging the conflict and which not only diminishes chances for achieving peace, but also derails mediation efforts. Mr. President, the current situation could drag the region into a spiral of conflict and crisis, which unfortunately will be reflected around the world, particularly in developing countries that have been and that continue to be affected by turbulence on the food and energy markets. For this reason, once again, I wish to underscore the following points. First, Algeria expresses its deep concern at the continued escalation and roundly condemns all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. In this context, we urge the parties to exercise restraint and de-escalate tensions, to comply with international humanitarian law, to avoid any action that might endanger the lives of civilians, and to refrain from attacking civilian infrastructure. My second point is that my country reiterates its call on the parties to choose the path of dialogue over confrontation, to choose agreement over escalation. Above all, to avoid the mentality of international polarization, particularly in light of signs of direct negotiations between the sides. We also call on the international community to step up its efforts to create the right conditions that might facilitate direct negotiations, bring positions closer together, and enable the achievement of an alignment of views to ease the escalation and to resolve the conflict between the parties. To conclude, Mr. President, Algeria reiterates its steadfast commitment to support all diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a cessation of the war and a fair, lasting, and comprehensive peace based on the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter, and bearing in mind the legitimate security concerns of the parties. Thank you, President.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Algeria for that statement that he delivered in perfect Spanish. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to warmly congratulate the Republic of Panama on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of August. We have every confidence in your able leadership to guide the Council's work during the critical period and assure you of Sierra Leone's full support and cooperation. I also take this opportunity to commend the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for its highly successful and productive presidency in July. Under Pakistan's leadership and meaningful initiatives, the Council adopted outcomes that strengthen our collective efforts to maintain international peace and security. We value their contribution and look forward to building on that momentum. I thank Assistant Secretary General Yensha for the sobering update on the worsening situation in Ukraine. I also welcome the participation of Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, and the EU in this meeting. In just a matter of days, this council has been convened for the second time to address the ongoing conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, a conflict that 3.5 years on continues to exert a devastating toll on civilians. Sierra Leone once again underscores the urgent need for an immediate cessation of hostilities and calls on all parties to engage in good faith diplomatic dialogue as the only pathway to a sustainable political solution. As we heard again today, the intensified use of long-range missiles and drones in heavily populated urban areas continues to cause tragic civilian casualties, including among the most vulnerable, children. We take note of the letter from the permanent representative of Ukraine reporting a massive area attack by Russian forces on the city of Kyiv on the night of 31st July 2025. According to credible reports, at least 13 people lost their lives and 130 others were injured. This attack adds to a grim tally of civilian suffering. Over the past 6 months alone, relentless area bombardments on densely populated areas have killed men, women, and children, while destroying homes, schools, universities, medical facilities, businesses, and critical energy and water infrastructure. The plight of children is particularly harrowing. They live daily with death, fear, and loss, enduring profound physical, mental, and psychological trauma. The July 31st attack reportedly killed a 6-year-old and injured 14 children, including a 5-month-old infant. According to UNICEF, approximately 2,520 children have been killed or injured since February 2022. With over 1,600 educational facilities damaged or destroyed, access to education has been severely curtailed, further compounded by disruptions to online learning due to repeated attacks on energy infrastructure. Mr. President, the deliberate or indiscriminate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure violates the core tenets of international humanitarian law. Sierra Leone reiterates its call on all parties to respect their obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. The principles of proportionality, precaution, and distinction must be fully observed. We urge the parties to refrain from conducting military operations in and around civilian infrastructure, including energy, water, and sanitation systems, health facilities, and schools. Operations near nuclear installations or other critical and civilian sites are especially unacceptable and carry risks of catastrophic consequences. Hospitals and schools must never be used for military purposes. With approximately 12.7 million people in Ukraine in need of some form of humanitarian assistance, Sierra Leone calls for the safe, sustained, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid, including to hard-to-reach areas and those close to the front lines. The international community must continue to support the humanitarian response plan for Ukraine and other efforts to facilitate the country's recovery and reconstruction. After nearly 4 years of conflict, it is evident that the legitimate concerns of the parties cannot be resolved on the battlefield. Sierra Leone therefore renews its call for all sides to engage in good faith negotiations towards an immediate ceasefire as a first step towards a comprehensive and lasting peace. Finally, we reaffirm our unwavering support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I'd like to join others in commending Pakistan for its excellent leadership in the Council last month, and then congratulating Republic of Panama on assuming the presidency for the month of August. We promise you, Mr. President, our full support. I also thank the ASG Jenka for the sobering briefing and welcome the representatives of the Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, and EU to this meeting. Mr. President, we find ourselves here once again to discuss the most recent horrific attack against the civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Today represents our third meeting in a little more over a week since the Council convened to urgently call for a cessation of the hostilities in Ukraine. Sadly, these principled calls are not being heeded, and we continue to bear witness to the bloody escalatory attacks by the Russian Federation, increasing its large-scale drone and missile strikes on civilian targets. In the early hours of Thursday morning, Russia launched a particularly brutal drone and missile assault on the sleeping residents of the Kyiv, killing at least 31 Ukrainians. 5 of them are children, including a 6-year-old boy and his mother, and injuring over 200 others, among them scores of children. These shameful attacks represent a large number of the children wounded in Kyiv in one night since this illegal war began. The Republic of Korea strongly condemns the indiscriminate and intensifying attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia, and these attacks directly constitute clear violations of international humanitarian and human rights laws. Civilians must be protected and should never be targeted. Yet, time and time again, this is exactly what we see from the aggressors in this illicit, destructive, ever-long war. Mr. President, in this connection, my government reiterates its urgent appeal for an immediate, full, unconditional cessation of all hostilities. We note with appreciation recent U.S. proposals calling for expedited timeline to reach an agreement to end this war. And time is of the essence, as each night and successive wave of drone attacks brings increasing deaths as well as physical and psychological horror for Ukrainian civilians, especially vulnerable populations. The only way to stop future atrocities, future destructions, and then future violations of the international humanitarian law is stop this war. We reiterate our appeals to Russia to respond to the increasingly vocal and unified calls of the international community to cease brutal attacks and instead lay the foundation of a peace by taking tangible steps toward an end of the war agreement. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President, and congratulations to Panama on assuming the Security Council presidency. I also wish to express appreciation to Pakistan for their successful tenure as President of the Council. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha, for your briefing. And I welcome the representative of Ukraine at this meeting. The Russia-Ukraine war should never have started and would not have under President Trump's leadership. It has been the largest and deadliest war in Europe since World War II and continues to wreak unconscionable death and destruction. Generations of Russians and Ukrainians have been tragically lost. On July 31st, Russia launched 309 attack drones and 8 missiles against Ukraine. This latest round of attacks has so far killed 11 civilians, including a 6-year-old boy in Kyiv, and have injured at least another 130 people throughout Ukraine's populated areas. They set fire to and destroyed residential buildings and the children's ward of a medical facility. The United States condemns these attacks. For more than 3.5 years, the United States and many other countries have implored an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, as did this Council in adopting its resolution 2774 in February. Last month, Russia launched more than 6,400 drones, an 18% increase from its previous record of 5,438 drones in 1 month, which was set in June. These attacks must stop. In light of Russia's intensified aerial assaults on Ukraine and the increasing toll on civilian life, on July 29th, President Trump clearly stated a peace deal must be done within 10 days. Otherwise, the United States is prepared to implement additional measures to secure peace. President Trump is offering both Russia and Ukraine a way out of this conflict. Once again, we implore them to take it. Vanquishing the scourge of war is the best thing for both the Russian and the Ukrainian people. We call on all UN member states to join us in this effort. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to extend warm congratulations to you and your delegation on Panama's assumption to the presidency of the Security Council. I would also like to thank Pakistan for its effective leadership last month and commend you both for the prompt and seamless coordination in responding to the requests for today's meeting. We thank ASG Yencha for the updates provided and welcome the participation of the representatives of Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, and the European Union in the meeting. Mr. President, we are once again compelled to address tragic developments on the front lines in Ukraine, following drone and missile attacks in Kiev yesterday, which struck residential buildings, schools, and hospitals. In his letter to the Security Council, the permanent representative of Ukraine reported that more than 300 drones and missiles were unleashed on densely populated residential areas in Ukraine, killing several people and injuring more than 100. Despite repeated calls in this council to uphold international humanitarian law and the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, we continue to receive reports of increasing civilian casualties resulting from attacks against civilian infrastructure or targets located in densely populated or residential areas. There have also been reports of attacks targeting civilians in some regions. Many of these have been substantiated by official reports from UN agencies and the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. OHCHR has also confirmed a 37% rise in civilian casualties between December 2024 and May 2025, compared to the same period in the previous year. The report also noted that in most cases, explosive weapons with wide area effects were used in urban areas, along with short-range combat drones, the use of which has also increased. As we assess the situation before us, a pattern emerges that indicates that attacks are becoming excessive and carried out in a manner that shows a blatant disregard for international humanitarian law. This cannot and must not be tolerated. The rising death toll in this war demands that we move beyond moral condemnation and deliver urgent action. Members of the Security Council have repeatedly made their expectation clear that the parties must commit in good faith to a diplomatic process aimed at ending the war. Yet, where we expect genuine dialogue, we see aggression and derision. The international community has a solemn duty and responsibility to bring this war to a peaceful and definitive end, and must no longer tolerate this affront to its goodwill and genuine efforts. The members of the Security Council must also do more to advance the implementation of Resolution 2774. We must change the dangerous trajectory this conflict is taking. Mr. President, the month of August holds profound significance for Ukrainians. In 3 weeks, they will celebrate their 34th independence anniversary. An occasion that is meant to be a time of celebration and reflection, and one where they reaffirm their right as a nation to freely determine their political status and pursue economic, social, and cultural development without external interference. Regrettably, this year, like the past three, will also be filled with deep pain and sorrow as they mourn all that has been lost in this war. 24th August should be the last anniversary spent in conflict. Guyana renews its call on the parties to show courage and political will that is needed to resolve the conflict now, peacefully, and in line with international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, at the outset, I congratulate Panama on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of August. I assure you of the China delegation's full cooperation with you and your colleagues. I also take this opportunity to renew our appreciation of Pakistan's work at the helm of the Council in July. I thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. At present, the Ukraine crisis is in a crucial phase. The parties should move in the same direction and build greater consensus and make greater efforts towards a political solution. I shall highlight 3 points. First, the parties to the conflict should prioritize the people's humanitarian and livelihood needs, spare no effort to protect civilians, strictly abide by IHL, and refrain from attacking civilians and civilian objects. Second, the parties to the conflict should work towards a de-escalation of the situation on the battleground without delay, and at the same time show political will and flexibility and maintain the momentum of peace talks, and through dialogue and consultation reach a comprehensive, lasting and binding peace agreement. Third, the international community, in particular the principal stakeholders, should actively push for a ceasefire and promote talks for peace, create an enabling atmosphere and favorable conditions, and provide such assistance as is needed, all in aid of a political solution of the crisis. President, in a space of 7 days, the Ukraine issue has been the subject of 3 council meetings. While we spend time and energy on further iterations of council deliberations on the matter, we ought to invest more time and energy in mediation and in promoting talks for peace. Guided by the 4 principles set forth by President Xi Jinping, China will continue to advocate peace, encourage and facilitate peace talks, and along with the rest of the international community, play a positive and constructive role in resolving the Ukraine crisis politically. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, allow me to once again congratulate you and Panama as you take the presidency for the month of August. You can count on my delegation's full support. I wish to express my appreciation to ASG Jenka for his thorough and sobering briefing. My delegation remains gravely concerned by the continued deterioration of the humanitarian and security situation in Ukraine. The latest developments only reinforce the urgency and complexity of the crisis. We are deeply troubled by the ongoing escalation of attacks impacting civilian and essential civilian infrastructure. The protection of civilians and critical infrastructure are obligations enshrined in international law. We reiterate that all parties to the conflict must respect and uphold these principles without exception. We remain convinced that there can be no military solution to this conflict. Continued hostilities serve only to prolong suffering and further diminish prospects for sustainable peace. Dialogue and diplomacy are the sole means to bring an end to this long-standing conflict and achieve sustainable peace. We take note on the ongoing discussion in Istanbul between the Russian Federation and Ukraine concerning the exchange of prisoners of war. While these negotiations are not without challenges, they represent a constructive step on the humanitarian track. We emphasize the important role
of the international community in supporting diplomatic initiatives and foster conditions conducive to peaceful settlement. Any durable resolution will require compromise, confidence-building measures, and genuine commitment to dialogue. We call upon all parties to exercise restraint, recommit to diplomatic efforts, and work toward an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. In closing, Mr. President, our delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict and achieving just and lasting peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. The people of Ukraine and all those affected by this crisis deserve a future founded upon peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Panama. Panama is grateful for the detailed update provided by the Assistant Secretary-General Miroslav Jenča, which sheds light on recent events that are regrettable in this conflict. In turn, we also acknowledge the presence of the delegations joining us today. Members of the Council, over the past 7 days, this Council has already met on 3 occasions to address, under various agenda items and at the request of different parties, the situation in Ukraine. This reality, while it may reflect the serious nature of the situation on the ground, prevents member states of the Council from addressing the facts with the foresight and responsibility that they warrant. Panama notes with concern that this Council, entrusted as the principal guarantor of international peace and security, is dedicating considerable time and resources to constantly debating certain issues without these debates translating into effective decisions or actions. This practice, however well-intentioned it may be, risks leading to dangerous institutional paralysis. The United Nations has, over decades, through effort, sacrifice, principles, and consensus, built a normative framework aimed at protecting civilians. This legal framework, enshrined in international humanitarian law, represents not only a legal obligation, but also an ethical imperative that should unite all member states. In recent days, we have witnessed yet another chapter of human tragedy, as was made plain during yesterday's Council meeting. Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and other regions of Ukraine suffered an aerial offensive with drones and missiles of unprecedented violence. These events must not and cannot be met with resignation. However, the world doesn't need more statements, it needs tangible results. The victims of war do not seek solidarity alone, they expect the decisive action of the international community to achieve peace. To achieve it, it's not necessarily constructive to pursue a diplomatic strategy that over successive meetings turns this chamber into a convenient platform to launch successive accusations and ripostes endlessly as if it were a game of ping-pong. Regrettably, this situation is not a game. It is a grave, sad, and all too protracted conflict in which every day civilians and military personnel from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation continue to die. Colleagues, for this reason, Panama reiterates once again its urgent appeal for a ceasefire that would bring an end to this war and urges the parties to engage seriously through diplomatic channels in discussions aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace. We make this appeal with the deep-rooted belief that peace is not imposed by the weight of power, but rather it is built and should be built through the political will of all actors and with respect for human dignity. We speak up not only for those who have lost their lives under the fire of armed conflict, but also for those who continue to risk theirs in the hope that this organization will effectively fulfill its founding promise, that is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Panama believes in multilateralism, but in a multilateralism that acts, a multilateralism that transforms mandates into solutions, that is not subordinate to vetoes, but rather that responds to respect and to collective responsibility. Thank you very much. I resume my functions as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I congratulate you on assuming presidency of the Security Council in August, and I also wish to thank Pakistan for their presidency in July. I express my gratitude to the Panama presidency for convening this emergency meeting Ukraine requested. I also commend Assistant Secretary General Yencha for his comprehensive briefing. Today, Ukrainian national flags in the cities and villages of our country are at half-mast to mark the day of mourning for the victims of another terrorist act by the Russian Federation, commitment of which Russia just recognized in this chamber. On the night of 31st July, Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine with 309 attack drones and 8 cruise missiles. Our air defenses intercepted most, but not all. Some broke through. Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, was the main target, with attacks also hitting Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Sumy, and Mykolaiv regions. As of now, at least 31 civilians, including 5 children, fell victims to the attack on Kyiv. 159 civilians, including 16 children, were wounded across the capital. One of the Russian missiles struck a multi-story residential complex in the capital. A section of the building collapsed entirely, reduced to debris and silence, along with the lives of people who called it home. Families were buried under rubble. Additionally, one private house was destroyed, and over 40 civilian infrastructure facilities were damaged. This attack was preceded by another terrorist act carried out 2 days before, when Russia bombed a prison facility in the Zaporizhia region. Not by mistake. They dropped bombs from the sky knowing civilians were inside. 16 people were killed, 43 more were left wounded. These are not accidents or collateral damage. These are deliberate acts of terror by a Moscow regime that hears the world's calls for peace and responds with bloodshed. Once again, the world witnessed Russia's response to our desire for peace, shared with the United States and Europe, with new killings and more destroyed homes. It is a deliberate campaign to terrorize civilians and destroy any notion of normal life in Ukraine. This effort is propped up by Iran and DPRK in blatant defiance of numerous Security Council resolutions. These regimes supply Moscow with drones, missiles, and ammunition, while Chinese companies continue to provide dual-use goods and equipment, contributions that further fuel Russia's ability to wage war and deepen the suffering inflicted on our people. Russian regime will not stop if it's not forced to. If we fail to confront it, it will continue its aggression and illegal occupation and will commit more and more war crimes and crimes against humanity. Torture, inhuman treatment of civilians and prisoners of war, widespread sexual violence, the deportation of civilians and children, destruction of cultural heritage, acts of ecocide, environmental devastation. In the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, Russia is committing systematic atrocities, turning the lives of millions of our people into a living nightmare. Putin's decree of March 20 mandates the forced expulsion of Ukrainian citizens from occupied Ukrainian territories, or forces them to undergo procedures aimed at forced integration and passportization by September 10 this year. Concurrently, it is conducting forced mobilization in the occupied Ukrainian territories. And these actions are part of a genocidal policy aimed at extermination of Ukrainian people. By all indicators, the Russian Federation is an undisputed aggressor. Military full-scale invasion, direct use of military force, occupation of territories, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, disinformation and propaganda, economic blackmail, interference in internal political processes, threats of using weapons of mass destruction, support for international terrorism, and border provocations. This list is not just a tally of crimes, it's a diagnosis of a regime that poses a threat to the entire civilized world. And this is why Ukraine requested this council meeting today. Kremlin wages this war because it sustains its regime, the war that he cannot win but refused to end. Real peace will come only through diplomacy, but backed by strength. Even Russian dictator Putin has cynically and unequivocally admitted the truth behind Russia's war against Ukraine. For the Kremlin, war is not a tragedy, it's a thrill. In December 2024, Putin remarked that when everything is calm, measured, and stable, Russians get bored. It feels like stagnation. They want, I quote, some action, or so-called движуха. This chilling confession reveals that all the justifications we've heard from Russia since 2014 are pure lies. What Putin and his criminal regime truly seek are imperial conquest, consolidation of power, and violence. Russian delegation sits in this chamber and speaks of diplomacy, while their missiles and combat drones strike people's homes, hospitals, and kindergartens. They talk about negotiations while expanding the front line and conscripting more men to die in a war of their own choosing and making. Russia awaits the international law to be defeated. They believe that the world will look away and that justice will be avoided. Don't push the horses. This will not happen. Russian illusions will shatter against the unbreakable resilience of Ukrainian people. Russian illusions will shatter against the unyielding will of the international community, because we stand united in defense of justice and freedom. Mr. President, Ukraine will continue to fight for its people, for its sovereignty, and for its future. Our goal remains a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace rooted in the principles of the United Nations Charter. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is ready to meet Putin, since all actual decisions in Russia can be made only by him. During the last meeting with the Russian delegation in Istanbul on 23 July, we proposed to organize such a meeting before the end of August. But no progress has been made. We understand who makes the decisions in Russia and who must put an end to this war. The world understands what has been made. We understand who makes the decisions in Russia and who must put an end to this war. The world understands this as well. Ukraine calls for moving beyond public statements and technical level discussions to direct talks between leaders. The United States has proposed this. Ukraine has supported it. What is needed now is Russia's readiness. As there was no positive development on other critical elements of the discussions, full and unconditional ceasefire for at least 30 days is needed to restore confidence and enable meaningful negotiations. Although this latest round of Istanbul talks yielded certain results in the humanitarian sphere, particularly concerning the exchange of prisoners, the Russian side, as before, shows no serious intention for a genuine peace. Kremlin's aim is to create an illusion of the diplomatic process, to delay sanctions and buy time in order to occupy more territory. By doing this, while also shelling and bombing Ukrainian civilians, Putin sends a signal of disrespect to all who are committed to end the killings. That is why we reiterate our call on the members of this Council to adopt resolution demanding a full, immediate and unconditional ceasefire between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. The world counts on the strength of your voice and urgent decisiveness of your action in bringing this war to an end. As we said yesterday, peace will not come through appeasement. It will come through unity, resolve and justice. The cost of inaction is too high. Delay only emboldens the aggressor. Therefore, in addition to the above, Ukraine calls for immediate and full synchronization and expansion of all sanctions targeting Russia's war machine, unconditional and total embargo on the exports of dual-use goods and technologies to Russia that are used in production of missiles and drones, decisive coordinated action to completely block all financial flows from the sale of Russian energy resources, which are the main source of funding for this war, strict measures against Russia's shadow fleet and companies involved in the illegal export of Ukrainian grain, immediate release of all Ukrainian civilian hostages and prisoners of war, as well as the return of forcibly deported Ukrainian children. Let's be clear, Russia's war of annihilation demands not only a condemnation, but also a collective stand coordinated, sustained, and rooted in the principles that define the United Nations. And the time has come for all to act accordingly, without delay. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Baltic States, Estonia, Latvia, and my own country, Lithuania. We also align ourselves with the statement by the European Union. We are grateful to the Presidency of Panama for calling this timely meeting today. We also thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenča for his briefing and the UN's continued substantive reporting on unbearable human sufferings and civilian casualties in Ukraine caused by Russia's ongoing attacks on Ukrainian cities. The Baltic states reiterated their full support to the UN and its agencies' humanitarian work and assistance provided to Ukraine. Mr. President, the international community must not wait to condemn Russia's cruelty. We cannot afford silence nor fatigue, neither in the region nor here at the Global Forum of Nations. If the aggressor is not stopped now, we will face the further escalation, which will destabilize the global peace and security. Mr. President, in the series of recent massive Russia's attacks on the night of July 31st, Kiev has witnessed yet another large-scale brutal onslaught, targeting innocent civilians, where the number of killed has already reached 31, including 5 children. Numbers of dead and injured are likely to grow as rescuers work day and night searching for trapped people in the rubble of the destroyed residential buildings. We also express our strong concern regarding recent attacks against the near Ukraine's nuclear energy infrastructure. We call on Russia to halt such dangerous attacks, which are also prohibited under international humanitarian law. The international community, through multiple UN General Assembly resolutions, has repeatedly condemned Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and demanded to end it. The resolution adopted by this Council in February urged lasting peace, but Russia is flatly rejecting all appeals to stop its aggression. On the contrary, we are witnessing intensive escalation of attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, including residential buildings, educational, religious, medical, and detention facilities, as well as evacuation infrastructure. Once again, Russia demonstrates that it does not want peace, but rather a complete subjugation and annihilation of Ukraine. The Baltic states reiterate their full support to US President Donald Trump's call on Russia to immediately agree to a ceasefire. However, instead of seeking a diplomatic solution, the Russian representatives keep making cynical statements justifying Kremlin's intention to continue this brutal war of aggression in pursuit of its imperial neocolonial ambitions. Mr. President, no one wants an end to this war more than Ukrainians. A full and unconditional ceasefire is the first step prior to any real negotiations. Ukraine already committed to it. It's now for Russia to reciprocate. All nations that seek peace and support the rule of international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, must stand in unity to support Ukraine's struggle for liberty and justice. Ukraine is defending the values and security of us all. Russia must be held accountable for every day of its continued aggression and for every innocent death brought about by its aggression. We would like to call on those supporting Russia's war effort by providing military, economic, technological, or diplomatic assistance to consider the broader costs. Any support to the aggressor enables attacks such as these on civilian and civilian infrastructure and contribute to the destabilizing global peace and security. The Security Council must take a decision demanding Russia's immediate compliance with its obligations under the international law. The responsibility and the consequences for war crimes committed in this war of aggression and for the crime of aggression itself must be ensured. The Baltic States reaffirmed their strong commitment to the Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and we will support Ukraine with whatever it takes to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on international law, including the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Senor President, let me begin by thanking you for convening this important session on the very first day of your presidency of the Council, which we congratulate you assuming of, and SSG Jeleńcza for his briefing. Poland welcomes the opportunity to address the Council on this cardinal subject. Today's briefing marks another meeting on Ukraine in just a few days. It reflects both the momentum of international engagement and the extent of Russia's determination to continue this brutal war against the people of Ukraine. The distorted Russian narrative about this aggression and the dissemination of disinformation, which we heard again today, and especially yesterday in this chamber, will not wash away Russia's responsibility for its atrocities. It will not undermine the facts about the nature of this war. And it will not divert us from our goal: peace in Ukraine, in our region, and in Europe. And we should never get fatigued by demanding peace for Ukraine. Mr. President, for over 1,200 days now, Russia has been defying international law and ignoring the will of the international community expressed in the numerous resolutions of this organization, including the Security Council, that call on Russia to stop its illegal and neo-colonial aggression against Ukraine. The intensity of Russia's air raids against Ukraine is growing tremendously, as we heard. The recent large-scale Russian missile and drone strikes on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities have again cost numerous civilians' lives. As we heard, yesterday's attack at dawn on Ukraine's capital resulted in 31 deaths, including children, and some 160 serious injuries, with scores more people hospitalized. Non-military objects were Russia's targets again. Residential buildings, including a multi-floor apartment block, hospitals, and other civilian objects, were heavily damaged or completely destroyed, causing immense human suffering. The pain inflicted on civilians is unbearable and must end, especially for innocent Ukrainian children being killed, injured, or kidnapped and taken to Russia. In this context, we remind that purposefully attacking civilians and civilian objects is a war crime and is an act of state terrorism. These attacks demonstrate yet again that Russia is not interested in ceasefire, let alone a durable peace. Despite public declarations of love towards peace, Moscow's actions speak louder than words. The bitter truth is obvious to the onlooker. Russia seeks to continue its unprovoked aggression, inflicting maximum harm on Ukraine's civilian population, while simulating talks as a ploy to buy more time and seize more territory. This strategy continues to be not only a present and direct threat to Ukraine's security, but also a danger to the stability of our region and to the future peace and prosperity across Europe and the world. Mr. President, in this respect, we strongly urge all states to use the full kit of measures available to exert a maximum pressure on Russia, and to end the others to fully refrain from fueling the ongoing aggression against Ukraine. Moreover, we continue to call for holding Russia fully accountable for violations of international law, human rights, war crimes, and crime of aggression at both state and individual levels. In conclusion, Mr. President, we renew our firm call for Russia to change its course, to declare a ceasefire, to stop attacking civilians, and to enter the path of negotiations. Poland stands proudly and steadfastly at the forefront of similar appeals stemming from various world capitals. Here again, in this very chamber, we reaffirm our support for Ukraine's right to self-defense, independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We pledge that we will continue helping our neighbor as long as it takes. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for the statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Daniel Beck, Chargé d'Affaires ad interim of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Mr. President, thank you. Let me join others in congratulating you on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of August. Thank you for convening this emergency meeting, and thanks to the briefer ISG Yencha for your updates. The news and images from Kiev and other Ukrainian cities are harrowing. Every day, ordinary civilians are paying the ultimate price of Russia's unprovoked and illegal aggression. Russia must immediately cease its indiscriminate missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities and towns. Intentionally directing an attack against civilians or civilian objects or causing disproportionate civilian harm is a war crime. The European Union supports an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine and other international partners, including the United States, have called for this too. Such a pause in hostilities could serve as a vital step towards reducing civilian suffering and allowing for further exchanges of prisoners of war and for return of forcibly displaced Ukrainian children. Mr. President, in February, Russia voted in favor of a UN Security Council resolution imploring a swift end to the conflict. Why has it not followed suit? We call on the Security Council to exert maximum pressure for a ceasefire. It would provide space for meaningful talks aimed at ending Russia's war of aggression and achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting peace grounded in the principles of the UN Charter and international law. Furthermore, the EU strongly condemns support by third countries and actors and entities therein which enable Russia to sustain its war of aggression. We urge all countries to immediately cease any direct or indirect assistance to Russia in its war of aggression. In closing, I reaffirm the EU's unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The EU will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Beck for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.